This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Spectra 1964, Atom Audio, Sampley, Isotope, and API. You're hearing my voice right now on the API 3122V mic pre and Spectra 1964 C610 comp limiter through Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron, all recorded safely onto an OWC SSD and mixed on Atom Audio monitors. So get ready to rock.
This is important that you're not so critical that you just want to stop because, if you stop, you lose. The only people who win are people who never stopped. And if the work itself really is truly compelling, you to get up every day and do it, then great. If you're critical about it and your mix sucks, then make it better. Fix it. Watch a million YouTube videos. Get into the mix with the masters thing. Get into it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Ever wonder how I get a consistent sound quality mixing hundreds of episodes of Recording Studio Rockstars? It's because I've been cheating by using Isotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on every single episode. Right now, you are hearing RX breath control, declick, declip, DS, deplosive, voice denoise, Ozone multiband compression, Neutron EQ, and limiting, all from Isotope. Try out the subscription option for yourself with an extended 30-day free trial at isotope.com/rockstars or use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. In my studio, I chose the OWC Mini-Stack STX Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and expansion hub because it seamlessly connects to my Mac Mini M1 for my dedicated audio drives, sample libraries, and backup drives. It's the perfect size to stack with the Mac Mini and add storage and connectivity over Thunderbolt or USB. Whether you have the new or older Mac Mini, nothing stacks up in your studio quite like OWC. Find the new Mini-Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Dave Kalmusky, a multi-platinum, multi-Billboard, #1 charting Nashville-based producer, songwriter, guitarist, multi-instrumentalist, engineer, and mixer, whose work in the studio with acts such as Shawn Mendes, Keith Urban, Meghan Trainor, Justin Bieber, Journey, Joe Bonamassa, Tenille Townes, the Sisterhood, Vince Gill, John Oates, Motley Crue, and many others is awesome. David's father, Kenny Kalmusky, was one of the original band members of the Hawks with Levon Helm, Richard Manuel, and John Till in 1958. Kenny went on to make records at Bearsville Studios in Woodstock, New York, and Nashville in the late 60s with the likes of Ian and Sylvia, Todd Rundgren, Cowboy Jack Clement, Ronnie Hawkins, Jerry Reed, and many others. And David joined us on an earlier episode, early on in the podcast, episode 52. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes, Rockstars, where he told stories of growing up around the music and finally coming down to Nashville. So very psyched to have you back. Please welcome Dave Kalmusky to Recording Studio Rockstars. David, are you ready to rock again, my friend?
We're ready to rock. Born ready.
Awesome, dude. Welcome back to the show, man. I haven't seen you in a minute. It's been, we're sort of coming out of being sequestered in our studios for a couple of years. And now we can get back to being sequestered in our studios for a couple of years.
Yeah, really. The scenery hasn't really changed that much for a lot of us.
Yeah, I know. What was that meme that went around early on at the beginning of the skeleton with cobwebs leaning over the console? And it was like before lockdowns or whatever, and afterwards. It was the same picture.
It's the same picture.
Yeah. But anyway, we don't need to talk about that stuff. How have you been, man? What's new with you? I imagine there's probably some changes you've been making as you've been hunkered down in your studio, just kind of dialing things in over the past couple of years. What records have been exciting for you? And then, what's new with your studio setup there?
Well, obviously probably the same story as everyone ad nauseum through the pandemic, we just learned how to make records remotely using network tools and all kinds of stuff, audio movers and session wire and that a lot of that, I mean, as soon as the lockdown started to happen, I got really lucky. Doing an MSNBC special with Sting and Sheryl Crow and Journey and the Eurythmics and everyone in their own homes recording stuff from Journey, sending me files from around the world and sort of mixing things here together for the show and learning very quickly, jumping on and doing vocals with Arnell in Manila, 14-hour time difference and remote controlling his rig. He's not an engineer, he's a singer. So I had to basically screen control TeamViewer, run Logic on his rig. We sent him a microphone and an interface. And that's kind of literally within the first week of the lockdowns. That was kind of the first thing that I got into doing. And then, Greg Wells and I, set up to do an entire Carrie Underwood Christmas record pretty much immediately following that through the pandemic. So Greg was in LA, I was in Nashville. Carrie and I were here sort of sequestered in my studio, and Greg was in LA, and we did strings at East West all over Zoom, and John Legend did a duet on the record with Greg. Just everything back and forth remotely. I played some guitar here. Greg played, everything else. Certainly other cameos that had occurred, but the foundation of that whole thing was certainly Greg.
That's pretty cool, man. It's interesting to hear you talk about it because everybody's experienced it on some level of trying to interact through the internet with other people making records. And a lot of the rock stars listening would be familiar with, just bounce out an MP3, send it to somebody, they load it in, do something. Then some might have explored things like audio movers or some of the other apps that do it. But it's cool because you're talking about it honestly, on the pro level, there's a more deep, in-depth approach to it, like making sure somebody's got the right microphone, using, what was the one that had always been around that you could put in your, in Pro Tools to stream in audio from another session?
Source Connect's been around for a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Source Connect. And then TeamViewer, I guess, is one where you can do the remote controlling thing. So it's just cool to hear about those different approaches to it all. So you were mentioning session wire as one of the tools that can be useful in the studio. What do you want to say about that? What is it? What would it be? What would be a good reason for people to go check that out?
Well, some of the way things evolved after lockdown and working on things remotely, it left me in a position where I wanted automated access to my room as well, too. And so, there are tools that, a lot of remote workflow has become standardized using a combination of like TeamViewer and audio movers and Zoom in combination, which is kind of a lot to cobble together. And I really do like the Session Wire guys, and their roadmap looks great, and they're music makers and they're studio owners. And they really listen to the community of music makers about what we want. So I've jumped on with them a bunch, and the whole plan, concept, and roadmap for those guys is to just create everything under one place, so that there's screen control, there's, video, multi-user collaboration, high quality audio, high quality talkback, browser links for artists that just as a one-click solution to just jump in on a session without having to register for an account and do a bunch of stuff. I kind of forgot how many loopholes there were setting up 3 different applications and explaining to, non-engineer people. And so I really like the roadmap the Session Wires have got on. And then sort of what's new in the studio since then, as we graduate back into a world of traveling and a world of, being back out in the open. I had some mixes on the go and had to go to New York City to produce the audio feed for the Dick Clark, Ryan Seacrest dropping of the ball in Times Square this year with Journey. And we were surrounded by COVID and cancellations and chaos. As well, I was like closing mixes literally that needed to be handed in for January 2nd. And there was a possibility that I might test positive for COVID in New York City and be stuck, while I had records open.
Eek.
And in preparation for that, and in fact, our drummer tested positive, and when you see the New Year's performance, that's Steve Toomey, the roadie, had to step up last minute and rescue the show and play the set with, play the thing with Journey for the countdown.
Wow. Well,
no pressure there.
Yeah,
right?
no pressure there. No pressure there. Well, you certainly had to jump through a lot of hoops in the past couple of years here.
Yeah. And so sort of in preparation for the idea that I might not be able to come back to my mix room, maybe 14 days, I don't know, with clients and deadlines and things. It's interesting. My entire analog studio here, I put online. I basically created a TeamViewer login. I have power bars that are network switches that I can turn all my gear on and off with an iPhone app.
Wow.
And I can literally just in New York, in a hotel room in New York City with a great set of headphones, or I've got these FIR audio in-ears that are just ported incredible, best things I've ever put in my head. They're just great sounding ears. I can literally just log in, power up my mix room, and open up Pro Tools. I even have a Megamix VCA console automation system from the 80s running on a Mac Performa, an old school Mac. I had some nerds on a Facebook Apple Macintosh enthusiast group create an emulator, and they had to build these modem port to MIDI module emulators for me to be able to run my console automation on Big Sur, and so
Whoa.
I can literally just log into Studio B, turn everything on, open up a session, load the console automation, and I'm mixing. I can mix and do fader moves on my analog desk from the 80s in 2022 in a hotel room in New York City.
That's wild, dude.
It's crazy. It's like it's really unbelievable to have all of the era. This console is from 1978, so just to have it all completely still connected, running, and access to my entire working catalog. Luckily, I didn't test positive. I got on a plane and came back to Nashville and got to work. But it's been fun just being at home and being able to, I'm mixing a couple of concerts that are 2 hours plus. So I can just like run the bounce and go home, and when I get home, I can listen in. I can listen in my car. I can actually just like let the bounce start to go down and stream it through my iPhone, through my car stereo, and just drive around town if I want to while the bounce is going down.
Using some like audio movers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that. It's funny, I feel pretty high tech about what I've tried doing, but it's nothing compared to what you just described. But my version would have been pulling the car right up next to the control room, and then putting audio movers on the master bus of my Pro Tools session so I could stream the mix straight out to the car, which of course goes to my phone and then, Bluetooths into the car or plugs into the car. And then because I'm close enough, I could bring a screen share laptop out to the car and control the Pro Tools session and try and make some, real-time mix moves. But there's always an awkward delay.
You can still do that if you move your car to anywhere. You could go to the ocean and your screen share is just TeamViewer. That's all.
I haven't tried something like TeamViewer. So that's pretty cool.
It's the network. So that's kind of the idea as well too. Also it makes me mindful to be untethered to all this analog gear and to just kind of print in earlier. I really have modified my workflow a little bit. For as bizarre as it is to look around this room, I am 100% in the box. Like I'm an in the box mixer at this point in my life and career. People go, man, that doesn't even make sense. Look at all your stuff. And it's like, yeah, I use it as I'm shaping and dialing things in, and I print it in. As soon as it's right, I print it in. And so I'm just running files,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good point. And so at what point of your workflow, do you find that that's the right moment to actually use the gear and print it in? It's like when the performance is happening, or is it often when somebody's already performed something and then you come back for another little effort of like treating a sound through some outboard gear and then reprinting it? Any thoughts on the most used, like the most common time in your work process that you always use the outboard gear?
Well, I mean, when I mix, every channel on my console is a hardware insert. So everything in this room is like a plugin, and it's active, and there's an automation system here. So I'm like kind of mixing old school as far as it's all up and it's live. But, I swipe across the entire timeline and hit commit before I leave for the night, and if nothing bad happens and no tubes blow and my console still has power the next day, then I just ignore the commit session. I'd throw it in the trash and I just keep working. But I just have safeties every night of everything I do. It only takes 3.5 minutes, and that's a pretty good safety of literally every single path. As soon as Pro Tools added their commit feature, that was a game changer. Like, it used to be I would mix a record and then book 3 days for my assistant to come in and print out stems, and that's not the case anymore at all. I mean, I do safeties every night, but I keep everything live so that I can just keep tweaking and stuff. But when we're good and the client gives me the thumbs up, literally the moment I get that email with the word closed in it, everything gets printed into a stem. And it's also mixed into stem folders that are the required deliverables. Actually, I use the Universal Music Group white page deliverable for Atmos stems as well too. So that work kind of just gets automated and gets done. We don't have a lot of fussing to do. And then when something goes to an Atmos mixer, sometimes I'll get a request for a special stem or something like, hey, can we have the reverb separated out from that source? And we're happy to do that, obviously. But a lot of that sort of the heavy lifting of figuring out all that stuff actually got templated over here over the last 2 years. So that's the other new thing too, is like deliverables for labels have really changed with the advent of Atmos and binaural and 360 and spatial audio. So we just decided to create an environment where we're mixing into that, and we're kind of creating most of those deliverables along the way.
Yeah, that's cool, man. The Spectra 1964 C610 complementer brings fast, clean, quiet compression and limiting to your recordings and mixes. The C610 includes the famous Spectra 101 amplifier used in legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, and Record Plant. I love my C610s for drums, vocals, guitars, and especially bass, which helps me get the perfect low end in my mixes. And you can make your mixes rock at Spectra1964.com. When your band hits the studio, it's smart to have all the songs, mixes, and notes in one place. But figuring out how to share all the files can be frustrating. There's always somebody in the band who can't seem to log in or wants to use a different platform. Samply.app makes it easy to collaborate and communicate by creating a shared project so the whole band can get organized before the session. Just upload a voice memo, lyric sheet, song charts, photo, video, mixes, masters, or even invoices, and start commenting. Sign up for your free account now with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at samply.app. Let me rewind and ask a really basic question about that, because I'm not doing the outboard gear stuff and I forgot. Can we do a commit in real time? So if we're using analog gear, will it commit in real time?
It all has to be real time. It can't be faster than real time.
No, but I mean, when we use the commit feature, I'm used to doing it and it just sort of zips it offline because it's just committing plugins. But
yeah, it has to be real time. It can't be offline.
And it will do it though. It'll just, you don't have to select a button for it. It'll just commit, but it'll do it in real time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It prints down in 3 minutes. It just says, it's just like a bounce, but it's a multi-channel bounce. Yeah.
That's badass. Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I should know that, but because I'm not using analog stems yet, I haven't actually tried that. Very cool. So that would, yeah, okay, cool. Right on. So what about the Atmos thing? I mean, you know, you're creating deliverables that will work for that. Have you guys gotten into Atmos over there at Addiction?
No, not at all. I'm letting everyone else, you know, skin their elbows and knees on that. You know, like I've gotten into very deep conversations with Reed Ship, and we spent a lot of time. And Reed's, you know, the king of Atmos, and so, you know, we just I produced and wrote some music on the current Mickey Guyton album, and Reed did the Atmos mixes. So there's a great example. You know, we already had the deliverables. They ended up with Reed. Reed called me and asked for some special things. Hey, could I get this, and this, or could I get that separated out? And we deliver them to them. And I'm not against Atmos, but there's just a lot of really great, amazing, clever people that kind of jumped into that super early. They're the innovators of it. There's some growing pains. There's some learning. And I'm just, you know, my schedule is really, really full of just recording and mixing in stereo right now, you know, and just like getting the records down on, you know, in the regular format. And as Atmos is needed, I haven't jumped into that learning curve, so I just hire it out. Like like I said, there's award-winning, Grammy-awarded mixers that have dedicated their rooms and their lives right now to mixing Atmos. So I'd be foolish not to just, you know, not only let them do what they do, but like sit in on it to learn. And so I get to go over and watch these guys, and it's been really fascinating and it's really great. I'll pull the plug when it's a sort of required at this level, but I'm just avoiding it right now. You know, for me, it's a process that, it's like mastering. It's like I got favorite mastering engineers. I can master, and I have mastered music, and I do mastering for some folks that sort of insist on it. But at the end of the day, I really prefer to work with a mastering engineer. I could go over to Blackbird, rent out a room, work with an assistant who understands the objects and the beds, and fumble my way through an Atmos mix and figure it out. No sweat. That's what I feel about mastering as well. Like but when I hand it off to one of my favorite mastering engineers, it always comes back great, and I'm so happy. And if there's a tweak or two, they're the ones that have to do it, and I don't even need to understand their tools or what they do.
Well, I bet you could play drums and bass and guitar and piano on every record too.
Exactly.
But it's kind of nice to work with some pro
the world's greatest. That's the beauty of Nashville. Exactly. Yeah. Right there. Yeah. We've got great Atmos rooms, great Atmos mixers, people who have dedicated their smarts to it. And we live in a town with all the greatest drummers in the world. I'm not a bad little drummer. And you know what? I've played drums on a couple of records here and there when it's, required or indie or something funky or whatever. It's cool. But, 98% of the records I've made, I've gotten to work with some of the best drummers on the planet. Why would I begrudge myself and my collaborators of that when we're right here?
Yeah, I'm a pretty good drummer right up until the fill arrives.
I have two fills, so
I got that one.
Yeah. I've got the wipeout.
Yeah. Cool, man. What else are you sort of excited about in the studio? Have you gotten any new gear in or any new software that you've been messing around with that just excited about learning right now?
I'm deep into Ableton, that's not new. It's been around for decades, but for me, it's new-ish, I've been composing and producing, mostly in Ableton for the last 2 years. And it's just so fascinating and exciting to me.
What are some of the things about Ableton that make you excited about it? Like what's a workflow like in there? Is it linear timelines like Pro Tools, or are you using more of the clips and the loop features and sounds and synths and stuff?
I'm using it all, man. To sketch out a quick idea, to just use the loop sequencing and just to throw together a progression and really work on it harmonically, hear how it works, and then dump it into the timeline is really a time saver and useful. But for me, what drew me in, interestingly enough, is like, me, we dynamited the parking lot and built an echo chamber. Right. And I'm always like, wandering around making like really weird, unique sounding things and working with like mic manufacturers to create bizarre microphones and buying like underwater aquamarine, and stethoscopes with microphones in them and putting water bowls under pianos and really just trying to create something really different and unique. I've got a record cutter from 1948, sitting in my outboard rack for cutting into lacquers. And for me, as technological as Ableton is, it's actually a blank canvas for sculpting sound and sound design in music production. And the big thing for me, honestly, is not even the advanced sampler. It's just simpler. The main sampler in Ableton. I have been walking around with my iPhone for a couple of years, kicking garbage bins and recording trains and loading them into the Ableton sampler and writing songs using those as synth pads and things. And they're really stunning. And you can create something so unique, so quick in Ableton. And there's the nerd part of us that you and I go, wow, this is amazing. That has to translate across to the listener, because as amazing as something is, if it's sonically not that inspiring, then we're just caught up with how cool that is. Everything I've done in Ableton to that essence, I turned a train from the train yards over off of in Woodbine into this synth pad and created a song bed that just stops people in their tracks. They don't even know what it is, but they're just like, what is that? That's so beautiful and amazing.
That's great.
And it's like, wow, you know what? It's a train, and so, resampling, chopping stuff, and then just building, electronic production in a timeline is unparalleled anywhere else than in Ableton. So for me, it's a composition tool. Once I'm finished there, then I'm a Pro Tools nerd. I mean, I just dump it all into Pro Tools to mix. I feel like everything's kind of got its environment for me, I like to track, real instruments in Pro Tools and track vocals in Pro Tools. But I'll even dump those vocals into Ableton to continue to compose and things. And, Pro Tools has Ableton Link now, so those two platforms are communicating better.
What does that mean? What does Ableton Link do? That's another tool.
It just allows. It's okay. It just allows me to use sort of transport impulse simultaneously in both. So when I hit play in Pro Tools, if I've created a sequence in Ableton, it's tempo locked.
So then so Pro Tools needs to have its interface for outputs, and Ableton has its interface for outputs, and what about the audio coming out? What's a clever way to do that?
There isn't a rewire client for, that is part of Ableton Link. It's really just time code and transport. So I have an HDX system for Pro Tools outputs, and then I have an Apollo for the Ableton outputs, and I just monitor them both simultaneously. I have the same setup at home. I have a Avid Carbon at home and an Ableton Push, and I use the audio out of the Ableton as well into a little mixer.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway, Rockstars. Sometimes to do multiple apps, it can just be helpful to have a couple of different audio interfaces connected to the computer, and then if you want to hear them both, it helps to have just a little mixer there that you can run them into on the way to the monitors.
And if you have a multi-channel interface, the other thing I did before I had a mixer at home was I ran the Ableton Push audio outputs into two inputs of the Carbon.
Yeah, smart, right? Just an aux input and
it's session. Just like literally hard patch it in and just open it on an audio track or an aux on input.
So sometimes it's funny how sometimes we get so, as the geek engineer in us, gets so caught up into like, what's the back end digital way to connect these things with software? We forget like, oh, I could just take a cable out, like
a couple of cables. Yeah,
days,
just plug them in.
Just plug them in. Go to Radio Shack, get 2 more cables, plug it in.
That's it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's exciting, man. So I think last time I was messing with Ableton, I think I have some light free install that came in, and I think I just need to get it again because I remember exploring Ableton 9 a while ago. I'm sure it's beyond that now.
It's 11 now, and it's it's a universe. It's a whole universe in and of itself.
And they have cool things like you can beatbox on a mic and it'll turn it into a drum set, right?
Absolutely. Just audio to MIDI is really good. Believe it or not, you can do that in Pro Tools right now too, if with the built-in ARA algorithms.
Really? Tell us about that. How would you do it in Pro Tools?
I think you have to have Melodyne, but I'm not sure if Melodyne Essential is included in Pro Tools, or if that's an add-on or what.
Yeah,
that
I'm not
is.
sure about that either. I know that you Pro Tools will want you to authorize Melodyne if it's going to use it for like audio to MIDI conversion and things like that, right?
Yeah. And so I happen to have, Melodyne Studio as well as Pro Tools. So I can just right click on like a bass guitar track and convert it to MIDI. And it's, and then, like double that bass part with like a synth patch or something cool. And that's all under the hood using the Melodyne built-in ARA algorithms and stuff. But I'm just not sure about the ownerships and authorizations processes.
Yeah, totally. So let me ask you this. Have you got any good tips you want to share for how to take an audio track of a drum and convert that into MIDI so you can start playing back samples to accompany that, for example?
I still use Massey's DRT tool, which used to be free, and it may still be free, or it may be really worth it because Stephen Massey's plugins are all, I think they're under $100, and it's just always the best money I've ever spent. I love all his stuff. I still to date use his CT5 compressor and his L2007 limiter. But the thing that is important to me if I'm using real drums and I want to either augment them, especially if I want to augment them rather than replace them with MIDI, there isn't a auto trigger program in the world that works for me. I've owned them all, and I don't want to throw any single one under the bus. But the problem about it is those programs can't necessarily deal properly with pre-emphasis every single time, and at some kind of global setting never works. Audio is just it's just dynamic. It's not perfect. And so the human interaction with the DRT tool allows us to go in and very sample accurately, and using a gate and a couple of built-in tools, make sure that every single detection marker is lined up perfectly, 100% sample accurately, perfectly with every hit. And then it also reads 128 MIDI velocities. So it can be very dynamic, but it's got like a built-in like MIDI compressor that can just level out the notes. It's still like drums to MIDI, which is DRT. I think, I don't know what DRT stands for. Drum something tool.
Drum recovery tool. I don't know.
I don't even know. And in fact, I consulted a little bit on that plugin. Again, as we talked about before, I took Stephen Massey out for lunch while I was in San Francisco working on a Journey record in the not 90s, in the 2000. I don't even remember what year. It was like 2011. And had mentioned to him about pre-emphasis and things, and we had talked about putting a gate in, and he really did. He updated that tool, and we still use it. I'm actually going to do like a video on that at some point. Man.
Last time we talked, you did a video on your echo chamber underneath the parking lot, and it was incredible. And we were able to link that in the show notes. So
yeah, I'll do a DRT video, and then you can link to that in this, because it really is. Like if you're into analog, real old school drum, like sample augmentation, this is the best tool in the world for that. And you can burn through a track and it will be perfect, like in 5 or 10 minutes. It's not this really super labor intensive thing. It's very intuitive. And so that's, kind of a long rabbit hole answer to your question is that's what I prefer for that. As far as triggering goes, and or converting to MIDI, that's kind of a manual process. I use Ableton for converting like mouth beats and hits and things to MIDI. And it's pretty good. You got to move stuff around, and it doesn't have all of that sort of deep, perfect integration. Mm-hmm. It's raw and tactile, but like once it becomes MIDI, then you can manipulate it accordingly.
Well, I love hearing your story of walking around with an iPhone too, because the iPhone will really do a good job of recording sounds and samples in the world now.
It's not even remotely lo-fi. No. You know, it's not like, oh, everything Kalmusky does on his iPhone turns into this cool lo-fi sample. You know, these synth pads and these things that I'm making in Simpler, in Ableton, out of iPhone recordings sound just as stereo and as wide and as gorgeous as any sort of factory preset synth pad.
And it's just so much more realistic that you're going to have a phone with you as opposed to intentionally go out with some portable audio digital recording interface.
No, I mean, the iPhone is just everything in your pocket, from a metronome and a tuner to a recorder to everything. Yeah.
Atom Audio introduces the all-new A7V monitor with rotatable HPS waveguide for the accelerated ribbon tweeter and advanced onboard DSP-based room correction using the included A-Control software or optional SonarWorks software and measurement mic, allowing you to tune your speakers for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. If you're ready to upgrade your studio to the famous sound of API's large format consoles, then you're ready for the Box, a small format console featuring the same analog circuitry and original 2520 op-amp design that made API famous for more than 50 years. Record through 8 world-class mic pre-channels, mix through 24 smooth as glass faders, and upgrade your home studio to legendary status. API now offers a virtual console experience, allowing you to get a personalized online demo of the Box at apiaudio.com. What about instruments that you really enjoy playing? Do you like composing stuff in the computer, kind of with the mouse? Do you prefer to have a guitar in your hand? Do you have ways that you like to balance that out, where you like doing a little bit of playing and a little bit of engineering every time you sit down to just sort of compose? And do you just compose for fun, and then you with no idea where these sounds or new song ideas would end up? Or do you tend to work towards a particular project where you're thinking, oh, this might be what we need for this project?
Just everything is different. So writing in a room with people, I don't want to hold up a creative process with a technical process. So I'm very much collaborative, and I toured as a guitar player, and I'm primarily a guitar player. I play on a lot of records as a session guitarist for a lot of people who that's my primary function. I don't mix records for them. They don't track at Addiction. I just, when I moved to town as a session man, and played on demos and did sessions. And so I tend to just, when I'm in a super collaborative essence, just grab a guitar. And if we need a little beat element, I'll, in the room, I'll build a beat and jam along with that. And if there's a moment in time where that guitar can just get put down, and I just record a little bit of it, then I can move to adding a little synth pad and a little bass synth or something under it. But I won't finish a track in a room with an artist on a co-write that day. If we love the song and we're pretty excited about it, it'll be sketched out with some sort of sonic intentions. Sometimes those intentions are to put a real band on it, and I've got a couple drum kits and bass rigs and guitar stuff. We put a band out on the floor in a heartbeat. Sometimes it's electronic music, it's just pop music, and so I'll after they leave, I'll obsess over the kick samples and sounds and snares and rises and drops and all of the things, And then for me, myself, just kind of like sketchpad composing to kind of stockpile ideas and keep a creative well. It could be anything, Sometimes I'll just be out on the drum kit and I'll come up with a really unique beat, and I'll have a bass line or a melody or something in my head, and I'll just record the beat and sing it, on my iPhone and just keep it in my, in my voice memos. Other times I just sit down at an Ableton and just start playing around and find sounds that kind of inspire some production. I certainly write lots on guitar and a little bit on piano, and then odd instruments. I really like weird tunings. I really like instruments that my theory doesn't apply to, because they're just tuned so abstract that I just have to use, harmonic value to create something. And so I've got, mandocellos and bouzouki and mountain dulcimers and omnichords and, celestes and just all kinds of odd instruments.
You've got a Celeste there?
I do.
Really? A legit Celeste?
Yeah, it's like a.
Do you ever go out and just play the Nutcracker around Christmas time?
No, but lots of people do when they see it sitting there.
That's great, man. So a Celeste is like hammers and little tiny bells in there or something like that? Tines?
Yeah, kind of. They're just tines, but they're loud. It's a loud little bugger. That's for cool. Sure.
Anything in the guitar world you've been excited about? Like new exciting amps?
I bought a 63 Stratocaster.
Oh, sweet.
I had to. I went to Carter and it was there, and then I couldn't leave, and I had to.
Wow. I bet that was a significant life investment.
Yeah, it's just one of the great ones. It's kind of the Holy Grail era, and it's beautiful and gorgeous, and it just chimes and sounds great. The good ones. I actually played 3 Stratocasters that day, and the other ones, one of them was more expensive and more vintage, but it just didn't vibrate, and it didn't chime, and it didn't ring out, and you just acoustically on your body, it just didn't feel right. And this thing, it just feels right. It's a good one. And lots of our friends in Nashville have come by and played it and go, wow, this is a really good one. So
that's exciting, man. I want to go guitar shopping. I actually went out and started treating myself to just listening to some acoustic guitars. And when I finally heard one that I began to like, it turned out it was a little bit more than the other guitars.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. It's funny how that happens.
Yeah, but it's so important. I mean, there's a real balancing act sometimes between, especially for somebody like me coming up in the indie rock world, where it's like, we can really appreciate funky sounds and funky instruments and stuff. But then I found myself sometimes surrounded by like all kinds of guitars that don't quite play in tune, but they look cool or have a character. And every once in a while, you're like, yeah, you got to have a staple of really, really high quality instruments too.
Yeah, a couple. And then you can also, it's funny, I've taken, the weirdest, Univox guitars and just like strange little finds. And I've taken them to Joe Glazier. I bought a guitar for $100 at one point that was just this quirky, weird Les Paul with like built-in effects like whirlwind and fuzz and, and I'm like, I got to have this thing. It's this horrible playing Les Paul, but it just so interesting. And I took it to Joe and said, what do we got to do to make this thing kind of play in tune? And he said, well, we got to pull all the frets off of it. We got to plane the fretboard. We got to we got to cut a new nut. We got to replace and move the bridge. We like basically build a guitar out of, the wood that's there kind of thing. And I was like, go for it. And it cost me $600 to fix a $100 guitar. And the guitar's now still worth $100, but it plays cool and in tune. And it's like, when I pick it up, people are always like, what is that? What if they think it's my pedal board or something? And it's like, no, this is just the guitar. That's what this guitar sounds like.
That's a cool story. And it reminds me that, sometimes the investment isn't like some of the instruments and the mics and outboard gear and things that we pick up for our studios. It's not about the resale value of that one item to somebody else. It's about the value of that item in our own world of studio and production and how it's going to integrate. I mean, like there are items that you can get, like even my MCI console, when I got that, it'd be easy to look at that and go like, dude, you're like, why'd you get that? Or somebody else looks at it and goes, of course, like, why didn't you get that?
How much did that console owe you by the time you sold it?
How much, you mean like what did I get it for originally?
No, I'm just intimating the fact that you made records off that thing for a decade and it didn't owe you a penny. It's like it paid for your mortgage and your house and your livelihood. I have $1 million worth of gear and I don't collect gear. Like I don't collect anything. It's all here for use. I want to make records with it. I want to record with them. I'm not looking for pristine examples. Even this Strat that I bought had holes drilled in the headstock and it had a neck break in it, which made it accessible and affordable to me. I don't want to buy a perfect showroom guitar. And, you were asking me about this Sony mic. It's a cool, weird little field mic that I found that's actually sounds really cool,
That's the one we're hearing your voice on right now for this interview.
Yeah, and it was like $65, and I have I have a Fairchild in here and a 175 and on vocals going through $100 Orban de-esser because it's the best de-esser in the world to me. It's the right thing. It never lisps a vocal. It lops off exactly the perfect amount. It makes it sound natural. And nobody ever discovered it and fetishized it and cranked its value up to anything. So you can buy them for $150 a pop. And every time I see one, I just kind of buy it,
Yeah. I think I still have an Orban. I may have it up in the studio. It's not in the rack right now, but the Orban compressor had a built-in de-esser, right? Where it was like a little yellow light that would flash on if you were de-essing a little bit when you were compressing.
That's interesting. Yeah. And these things, Ethan's opened this thing up and it's like a mic pre and it's got a transformer in it and it's just really well built. And so, yeah, just to your point, it's like, I'm not buying things for their resale value. I'm buying things because I'm excited about how they sound or resonate or what music I can, make with it at the end of the day. And if something hangs around this building for, a year, then it's just not really getting used. It doesn't end up in a glass case somewhere or hung up as a showroom piece. It goes back on eBay or Craigslist or traded locally. And I just find other things that I want to plug in and use.
Yeah, no, I think that's smart. And I mean, to answer your question about my console, one of the things that I don't think anybody could have really predicted was that just the story value of it alone, when somebody came into the studio, people want to come into the studio and they want to feel excited about being there. They want to feel like they're part of a story. You know what I mean? And
yeah, the ongoing history of that console is fantastic. So people get to talk about that history and the record they just made and the continuation of that.
So there's a lot
of
unexpected ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So anything in the like kind of guitar pedal world that you've gotten excited about lately?
I just got an Empress Zoya, which is probably the most elaborate ZOIA and ZOIA for you non-Canadians. I just caught myself with Z, the Queen's English. It's like a sequencer. It's a 3 oscillator synthesizer. It's a guitar multi-effects unit with everything from amp emulation to every kind of effect. You can add any kind of synth process to a guitar. It's really deep. It's a super nerd tool. And like, I haven't incorporated it onto a pedal board yet. I actually, when I have time, I put it up on a stool so I can have it at my, desktop level and I plug into it and I just try to invent and make presets. But there's a whole community of Zoya nerds out there that actually make and share presets, and you can just go and download other people's presets and listen to them and collect them and trade them. And it's a pretty darn cool. Like, it's like one pedal does everything my entire studio board does, if it comes down to it.
Wow. And this is so it's a digital pedal that sort of like
it's like a little computer. It's even got like a CPU level, like indicator. So if you just load too much shit up, it actually starts to crap out. Like it's got a built-in CPU.
That's cool, man. That's cool. That's exciting. I'll have to check that out.
But it's a step sequencer and it's also like a modular patch. So it's got, all these patch points that are just buttons, but you just like hold a button at, which is the output of a compressor. And then while you're holding that button, press the input to an overdrive. And then, you build your own sort of routing and patching. It's a modular synthesizer guitar pedal.
Awesome,
it's crazy.
dude. Awesome. OWC now brings you the Mini Stack STX, the world's first Thunderbolt 4 certified storage and hub expander, perfectly sized to stack with the Mac Mini and the ideal storage and connectivity companion for Thunderbolt or USB-equipped computers and devices. With a universal SATA HDD SSD bay and NVMe M.2 PCIe SSD slot, you can expand your Mini's storage capacity to gigantic proportions. 3 Thunderbolt USB-C ports enable you to connect to millions of Thunderbolt, USB, and future USB 4 drives, displays, AV mixers, cameras, and tablets, as well as desktop accessories like a keyboard, card reader, or mouse. I'm using the Mini Stack STX paired with my Mac Mini M1 to house my dedicated audio SSD and sample libraries, and it works great in my studio. Find the new Mini Stack STX and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. Have you ever wished you could remove the click-track bleed from a singer's vocal mic, the sound of shuffling feet from a full choir, or clicking noises from the valves of an otherwise brilliant trumpet solo? These are just some of the incredible things I have been able to clean up, edit, or remove from a recording using the magic of iZotope RX. Great for mixing with a collection of plugins for your DAW to manage plosives, clicks, S's, noise, buzz, reverb, breaths, and even guitar fret squeaks, with a set it and forget it simplicity that lets you focus on your creativity in the studio while you let iZotope handle the audio challenges. You can even adjust your vocal, bass, and drum levels inside of a finished stereo mix using the wizardry of rebalance. RX is truly magical. Try out the subscription option with an extended 30-day free trial at iZotope.com/rockstars or use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Hey, Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is David Kalmusky, joining us from Addiction Studios. David, are you ready to jam, my friend?
Yeah, man, of course I am.
You started to talk about pedal boards, and I've realized that that's a really important aspect of guitars in the studio. I've sort of long been the guy with the box full of pedals, and then, you know, they get scattered on the floor and hooked up and stuff when we're going into guitar overdubs. But I've come to terms a little bit more with the importance of having a central, you know, like pedal board that have the basics that you know you're going to want to have access to, and having that really dialed in such a way that, like, if you wanted to go play a show, you could. But even in the studio, it's like if you want to go out into the live room, you just take the pedal board out there, and now that becomes part of your rig. Or if you're in the control room, you can set it up in there, and it's not invasive. So much of what we do in the studio can feel very invasive to our workflow. So what thoughts do you have about doing a pedal board? What have you learned about it? What have you arrived at where you're like, this really works for me in all those situations?
Yeah, especially, you know, I like what you have to say and agree 100% about, like, a core board that kind of does a little bit of everything, like one really nice utilitarian multi-effects. And, you know, I like the Line 6 stuff for that, like either a little HX Stomp, which is just like a tiny little one banger that's got everything you could ever imagine, and they're all pretty good. And then like your favorite overdrive and a tuner and just something really functional. The thing that's interesting about guitar gear and pedal boards especially is that, you know, we're super nerds. You've participated in a lot of this stuff over here. We actually get together and listen to cables. You know, that's how deep we go. And so I've listened to 500-foot and 700-foot and 1,000-foot balanced cable runs of like microphone cables. And the difference is, you know, between brands is like sometimes indistinguishable. Sometimes it's really, really minute, you know, but instrument cables, boy, The difference between a 15-foot cable and a 30-foot cable, like my mom can hear that, you know?
Right.
It's not subtle at all. And then the other thing is just grabbing a whole bunch of pedals, cobbling them together with whatever power supplies you have laying around, and then running your guitar through them all turned off versus plugging straight into the amp is not subtle.
Right.
Either. Some pedals have buffers, some don't, some have true bypass, some don't. Some power supplies are mismatched, or you've made the wrong decisions and there's weird shit happening on all of that. And like to get that stuff sorted out so that you have like a board that is really, really transparent. And, you know, like I have true bypass switches on my board that literally bypass the whole board in a true bypass fashion. You know, and I can, and like there's a company called Exact Tone Solutions that they do all my pedal boards in town. They do everybody's pedal boards, and Barry O'Neill and those guys over there are just really, really brilliant. And they actually not only understand like where you need a buffer and where you don't need a buffer, but like they know these pedals, and they know, you know, they'll warn me. Like I'll call Barry and go, hey man, I got one of these things. And he'll say, well, you can do this and this, but you can't do this. And just to let you know, that's a little bit of a tone robber. So you're going to want a true bypass on that, or a blah, blah, blah. You know, like that's their job. We talked about great Atmos mixers and great drummers in Nashville. We actually have like great pedal board guys in Nashville, you know? And so it's really, really important for me that all my like core ecosystem boards have a real transparency, that the power supplies are all properly calibrated and matched, that there are no, you know, not too many buffers in line, or that there are things that can be bypassed or tweaked. And so all my guitars are always going to sound good through them. Like you said, I can grab it, throw it in the trunk of the car, go sit in at a club. I can, you know, take it to other studios as part of a cartage thing, or go sit in, and it's just never going to be a problem, you know, like with, you know, wall warts and mismatched power and like the dynamic decision making of throwing a duffel bag together with a bunch of pedals. That can change your odds. It's kind of like rolling the dice sometimes, you know? And so I have like core boards. I have set quite a few pedal boards that of different sizes. I have my big, massive main studio board that is just part of the big cartage rig that is set up out on the floor here, but it also rolls around to other studios when I'm just, you know, guitar player for hire.
Does it come into the control room with you, or is that the big one?
It has, yeah, absolutely. It can, you know, it just depends on where the producer wants me. And, you know, if it's a band tracking date, I'm usually out on the floor with the band and my cabinets in isolation. But if it's an overdub session and I'm called to just come, you know, to another studio for overdubs, because it's so big and, you know, I got my amps and I have 70 guitars in this building. I certainly can't take that as cartage. So for guitar overdubs, I usually try to talk producers to come to Addiction to do it. But sometimes they've camped out somewhere. You know, they're camped at Ocean Way for a week making a record and they just want me to come over there. In which case I have like a guitar vault that's a 12 slot. I just take the best things for that project. I usually ask the producer, you know, what's the vibe? What's the scene? Sometimes it's full of weird guitars like we talked about. And sometimes it's like just all staples. Just depends.
Do you have a sitar?
I had a fake, not a Jerry Jones, but it was like a knockoff thing, you know, that for a little while. And no, I don't have a sitar.
Oh, I think doesn't like Electro Harmonics or somebody make a sitar pedal too?
They do. And I do have one of those. And so back to the pedal board thing again, I do have a tremendous, ridiculous box of pedals, including a guitar synth, you know? And so getting into the sitar thing, honestly, if somebody really, really wants me to do a sitar thing, I have a Jamstick, which is a USB-C. It's a guitar. But it's a USB-C MIDI controller. It's kind of an evolution of the Roland GR synth stuff. And that can come with me. And I have a laptop with every VI and soft synth and the complete control and contact. And I can pull up real sitar samples and play them on my guitar. And that's kind of like when I get into some of those worlds and some of those sounds, I had this like weird guitar with a sitar-y bridge and a resonator cavity, and it just never really translated like a real sitar through a guitar amplifier in the studio. I was always kind of disappointed every time I plugged it in. And then I got into like, guitar synth world for some of that stuff, and it's like a no-brainer for me for that. And then anyway, back to the boards is like my big studio board has a true bypass loop on it for my lunchbox full of chaos. And in that is the, just pedals that are really unique that don't need to be staples. They're only the staples are on the board, and then all the really weird shit. I have a collection of fuzz pedals. I have a collection of I have every Electro Harmonix pedal, on the planet. So I do have those little synth pedals and the Mellotron pedal and the sitar pedal and the crazy cathedral reverb pedal and the blah, 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 and the Memory Man and the Memory Boy and the things. So it just kind of depends. And, I can throw something together on a producer's request, in about 15 seconds. The board is set up with auxiliary power and I just open up my box of pedals and throw whatever that extra weird flavor is into the board.
What about the routing of pedals? Because that's a significant thing. It's like, does this pedal go before that pedal? How would your thing handle that so you don't have to start unplugging cables? Or worse, you don't get into that thing where you're trying to rip the pedal off the Velcro off the board to move it around.
No, I don't actually add anything to those boards. They're all Loctited, so the boards are finite. And then so my big studio board has 2 tiers of true bypass loopers, okay? And what those are, and when I say looper, I don't mean like recording loopers.
Right,
they're
right. Like a signal loop. You can send it and
signal
return.
loop, right? The top one has all of the overdrives and compressors and saturation and fuzz and anything in it. And then the bottom one has all the time-based effects, and delays and sort of additive and reverbs. And like I've got an HX something line 6 thing, and I've got an Eventide H9 and some things go on that. My rig is pretty complicated because it's got a switcher that was kind of core. It's 2 switchers that were developed together by Barry O'Neill at Exactone. And the rig is intelligent. It knows if I'm using a match list that I have an effects loop in the amp. So it sends the top bar with all the overdrives and all of the stuff to the front of the amp. Then it actually takes the effects send of the amp and sends it to the bottom of the bar. It receives all of the delays and the cool shit, and then it returns that to the effects return of the amp. And so it's a split board. Interestingly enough, the board knows that if there's no effects loop on my switcher, if I select a Marshall Plexi or my Bassman, or it's a Showman head now, or one of the other amps that doesn't have a loop, it combines the bars and it puts the overdrives ahead of the delays, and it makes it just a traditional board that reports to the front of the amp.
Right. So when you say select an amp, do you actually have it set up where from where you're playing guitar, you can hit some button it and actually sends the signal to a different guitar amp, which is already mic'd up?
Oh, it sure does.
That's amazing, man. So you're,
I have so the main head, stack is, it's 5 amp heads, so it's got a Marshall Plexi on the bottom, and then it's got a Fender Showman, and then it's got a matchless HC30, and then it's got 2 custom vintage sound amps like a Princeton, and then another weird bizarre custom amp, and at the top it's got a high watt. And their inputs, their speaker outs, and if they have effects loops, all report to a switcher. And the switcher, I can select 4 cabinets and all of these heads.
Wow.
And so I can be sitting in my chair and decide I'm going to play a Les Paul into a Marshall Plexi. I hit one switch and it'll literally bypass my pedal board 100% too. Like I can just go, I want to go straight into it. Like my guitar plugs into the pedal board, but I can just immediately jump it to the pedal board out and true bypass the entire board so that the guitar just reports straight to the amp reports straight to the cabinet. It's as old school and basic as it gets for signal routing, or I can open up the one loop or the other loop and start to integrate pedals, as needed.
That's pretty wild. So, one of the conundrums for me is I love being able to play guitar in the control room, but sometimes I feel like you need to somehow, like I'll want to carry the guitar out to the amp, use a short cable, plug it into the amp, make sure the amp's in the right kind of ballpark and it's responding, and then plug it back into the long cable to the control room and then start messing with it and hope that I'm in that ballpark. But there's so many, moments of uncertainty where I'm like, am I doing it right?
Well, and a long cable sounds so much different than a short cable too.
Yeah,
so, anytime where there's a necessity for a long cable, I abandon it and I just use reamp boxes. I know that the reamp box for purists are sort of like, no, I got to plug straight into the amp. But honestly, a reamp box sounds so much more like a short cable than a long cable.
So can you explain,
it really does.
Can you break that down for us? What does that mean when you say a reamp box instead? What's
so the reamp box
routing?
just takes the instrument cable and it converts it into a balanced cable so that it doesn't incur capacitance in a long run. And you can use tie lines or patch lines or long mic cables in a studio, or if you're in a rehearsal hall, or if you're DIY, you can plug your guitar into a reamp box that looks like a DI, or it can be a DI. Oh no, it's got to be a reamp box. Out of that reamp box, XLR, you can go 50, 100, 200, 400 feet into a long microphone cable and really not lose any signal. And on the other end, you plug in the receiver, the reamp receiver, and it's got a 1/4 inch out, and you plug that into your amp. And boy, what a difference that makes compared to a 100-foot guitar cable. Like there isn't a 100-foot guitar cable on the planet that sounds good. There just isn't. It just can't work. But the reamps, I can reamp anywhere in the studio, and you've been over here. There's rooms all over the place. It's pretty massive, so I can be in the control room, plug into a reamp box, and have a cabinet upstairs in the lounge, or like a combo amp upstairs in the lounge. In fact, like really, really long speaker cable runs do the opposite of what really long instrument cable runs do. So if you run like 100-foot speaker cable to your cabinet, it gets brighter and thinner sounding, and it loses its mid-range, it loses its body, it loses its pronunciation. If you run a 100-foot instrument cable, it kind of does the opposite effect. It removes the top end. It gets duller and muddier and darker. 100-foot speaker and or guitar cables are not good solutions, but 100-foot reamp solutions are great ones. And I just use the little orange radial reamp kits. They're just like a 2-box set that you get at Guitar Center for a couple of $100. And we have them all over the studio. Like I have combo amps all over the studio that have reamp boxes sitting on top of them. And, if we have a big session with a lot of guitar players and stuff, we can just reamp some of them into other rooms if we need to.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking at the radial stuff. So it's an orange box about the size of a DI, and you need 2 of them. So if you're going to get, or is it
well,
one
there's like a send and a receive,
things?
So that you can buy them in sets, and I just buy the send receive set.
Cool, man. That's great.
They also just another tip for studio, just like I have one in my lunchbox, and they make an API lunchbox version. So I run like guitar pedals as DAW inserts, and it converts the line level stuff to instrument level and then back, and it's got blend. And the Radial 500 series box, I can bring any of my guitar pedals in here to the control room or the mix room and run them as console inserts, run them as DAW inserts, and I have like cool guitar tape echoes in my mix room. So I've got like a full tone tube tape echo and a Univox tape echo and a Gill copycat and an Echophonic and all these guitar echoes and pedals, running in the console. So that's like in the same ecosystem. The radial stuff is really good to look into if you want to play around with those things.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm looking at one right now. And so it's a 500 unit. You could just plug it into a slot. It's got output 1, output 2, a couple outputs on it. Although I might be looking at that might be just the part of the chain or something. But that's cool, man. That's cool stuff. I have something called Audio Simplified. It's a a unit that also has power on the front of it, which is cool because you can send some stuff to it. It'll go out to a pedal, and then it gives you a little power grid so you can plug your pedal power in at the same time, so you're not like hunting around for a way to power the pedal.
Yeah, that's cool.
I like all those clever solutions. And of course, the Little Labs, what is it, the PCP distro or something?
Yeah, and I've got all the Little Labs stuff in all my rigs, kind of all throughout the studio. I use the phase alignment tool on bass amps. I use, all of Jonathan stuff on, my guitar rigs and the reamp boxes and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all super high quality stuff.
Jonathan Little, he's awesome. Nice guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's fantastic.
So you just finished an awesome mix and sent it off to the band, but the singer texts you with lyric changes, the drummer emails you wanting a different fill, and the bass player DMs you about a wrong note in the chorus. But which mix version were they talking about anyway? Don't you wish there was an easier way? Samply.app comes to the rescue as your ultimate mix assistant, streaming full resolution audio so your clients can easily listen and send notes from their mobile phone on the road or the computer back at the studio. All mix comments are time-stamped directly onto the correct mix version with no confusion, and you also get A/B listening capability with synchronized playback and level matching for easy mix comparison, all inside Samply. It's file sharing that was built specifically for music, and it all works inside your browser with no downloads required. Sign up now for your free account with 25 gigs of storage and unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade at samply.app. 50 years ago, William G. Dilley introduced the world to his revolutionary new dynamics processor, the Model 610 Complimenter. A truly unique device, the Model 610 was not only the fastest, cleanest, and quietest of its type, but was also capable of providing completely separate peak limiting and compression functions. Today, Spectra 1964 introduces the Model C610 Complimenter, described as the most versatile piece of audio gear you can buy. Great for adding control and power to everything from vocals, guitars, and bass to mixing and even mastering, the C610 gives you the same massive sound that rocked legendary studios like Stax, Ardent, Advision, A&M, and Record Plant. It even has enough gain to function as a mic preamp. I'm using the C610 on every record I make at the Toy Box Studio, and you should too. You'll love it. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. All right, let's see. So we talked about pedal boards. Very cool. Maybe we should go the next part of the chain and talk about how you would mic up all those amps. Do you got any tips for what you found to be really good miking techniques for those amps?
Well, I do have a Dynamount, which I think is fun.
What's the Dynamount?
The Dynamount is like it's like a little robotic mic stand that you can control in your iPhone while you're sitting out. I can literally be on a session and like open up my iPhone app and move the mics towards the center of the cone.
So go to side, and will it pivot the mic? No,
it does 360. It does on axis, off axis. It does all kinds of stuff. They've got lots of different solutions. I've got just the general main Dynamount, and I'm usually just swiping back and forth. But I can just swing it back a little bit and just change the axis. So there's that. I personally myself, I've kind of settled into using a BK5 and a Cascade Fathead with a Lundell transformer. Those are kind of that's my favorite miking combination for for most guitar scenarios. And but I always blend them down to a track. I don't record them separately. I know a lot of engineers keep those separate, and I just feel like I just get a great tone and commit to it. It's down, and nobody could ever mess with it, or I'd never lose that balance, because the blend between those two really do create the tone in the moment. So I'm definitely about committing it. In fact, so much so, that I don't even bring up the console anymore. I bought like a little 2-channel Gates bimote mixer, and it's got mic 1 and mic 2 and an output, and that goes to tape. And so there's no, what you record is a track of guitar, and
that's cool. So you can mix the mics right out at the actual amp, or like where would you put that mixer? Close to the amp itself?
Right now I have it in the control room because I have the luxury of having interns and engineers, and I can dictate stuff to them over a microphone, like, hey, a little less fat head, or let me hear just the BK5, or blah, blah, blah. And we play with the blend. But recording myself, if I'm sitting in the control room, and I wouldn't be adverse to even having that as part of my guitar rig out on the floor, and literally sending the engineer in the session the mixer output as my mic, if the studio had enough, pass-through panels and stuff to run the mics to my guitar rig. But that's probably a little excessive. And I mean, most producers and engineers would hate me if I ever wanted to do that. I'm not that pretentious. There's so many great engineers. Lots of guys get great sounds. When I'm just a guitar player out on the floor, I just turn off the producer, mixer, engineer, studio owner hat, and I just play guitar.
That's the way to do it. It's a lot of fun.
It's great fun. And when the console catches on fire or there's a piece of broken gear, I'm at the coffee maker talking about cars with the drummer, like it's not my problem. I'm just playing guitar here. And, these engineers in Nashville are all so freaking good. If you're on a session, let these guys put whatever mics they want up. And I think once in a blue moon, I might have had a open dialogue once prompted from the producer and engineer over the talkback and headphones. If they're saying, to me, what do I think about the representation of that? Or is that kind of what we're going for? And I might say, let's just try the BK5 on this because it's just a Stratocaster part or something, and it doesn't need a lot of bottom end. But 98% of the time, everything sounds great in the headphones, and I just play guitar.
Right on. So the BK, the fat head is a newer ribbon mic, and the BK5 is not. That's a vintage ribbon mic.
That's correct. Yeah.
And I do have a BK5, and I use it occasionally. And I'm always struck by how cool it sounds. And I like to think of it as like the 57 of vintage ribbon mics. It's just kind of looks like one,
But it doesn't fizz, it doesn't fizzle, and it doesn't sound. It's funny if you listen to a 57 versus a BK5. This 57 sounds almost comb filtered or notch filtered. The BK5 sounds pretty natural. Now, a 57 on a Marshall Plexi is a formidable weapon. It's a really great sound. I mean, and so in my, my little guitar overdub world, I've got a Royer 121 and a 57 and a couple of other real staples on stands ready to go, and there is like that sound. I know what a 57 on a Marshall cabinet sounds like. And when I don't play around with the BK5 and the fat head and the blah, blah, blah. Like those for me are kind of like what I described the functional pedal board as. Here's the staple. This is always going to sound great on every tone, from a Gretsch to a Marshall to a Stratocaster to a 335, and so, but like there are things that you look for, which is a 57 on a Marshall cab is a thing, Yeah. And so that's always on standby, ready to go.
Do you actually have so when you've got all these amps that you can select, do they all share one speaker cabinet so that you have one speaker cabinet mic'd up, or do you have multiple speakers that you have to have mic'd all at once?
In the big rig, in the big setup, I have 3 cabinet selections, and sometimes a 4th, and depending on whether the engineer on the outside wants to mic all of those up preemptively or move microphones when we switch cabinets. The cool thing about the Dynamount Robot and my main Marshall cabinet is I ported the Marshall cabinet and I put Celestion Blues on one side and Green's, 25 watt pre-rolla Celestions on the right. So I can swing that robot back and forth between those two speakers with the same set of microphones.
Do you ever find that the sound is right in the middle, halfway?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Oh, no. Sorry. No. I thought you meant of the speaker. Yeah, like the wood, no.
Yeah, I do remember, I think I remember hearing Eric Valentine once say that Queens of the Stone Age, like the sound that they absolutely loved was like miking halfway between the cast speakers or something. And they just landed on something and then like, that's it,
I will tell you, I've got a B15, an Ampeg B15 bass amp here as part of the house rig. And we put an RE20 up. And this sounds funny, but we had an intern slowly sweep the microphone from one side of the speaker to the next. And we had some friends over, and really accoladed, well-listened friends. And one who is like an award-winning, incredible bass player who was playing the bass. And every time we got to a certain spot, everyone in the room went, what's that? Like, mark that. And the intern's supposed to like put a little piece of console tape right where he was, just so we know we can come back to it and pick it in our favorite spot. And there's one clear favorite spot on that. And that is to put the RE20 directly in front of the baffle board that dissects the speaker. So there's like literally a piece of wood down the center of the speaker that is part of that cabinet design.
So so there's literally a piece of wood that sort of runs in front of the cone?
In front of the cone, in front of the center of the cone. And when you mic that piece of wood, it is like the perfect little dissection. It takes the honk out. It's very round sounding. It's more phase aligned and phase accurate with the DI of the bass. Like recording a bass amp with a DI bass, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people kind of get that wrong on the way in and then fix it later and time align and phase align it and stuff like that. I really try to get it right. I feel like the bass amp is actually 230 samples out. So if the bass player doesn't necessarily notice, we'll put like a time adjuster plug-in on the DI itself and just kind of move that so that it doesn't feel like there's latency or delay, and just try to really align those time-wise up for the performance on the way in. And then I'll use Jonathan Little's phase alignment tool harmonically and filter-wise or whatever he does with that, which is an amazing little tool to just completely bring it into focus. And bass players thank me a lot. They hear it in the headphones and go, why can I have so much amp and DI blend and it sounds so good and punchy and tight and not phasey and weird? And it's just a combination of those worlds. Nevertheless, it's funny when I give a studio tour or I know people are taking pictures, I just don't want to field trolls and ridicule. So we always move that RE20 off the baffle mark and so that it's literally just sitting somewhere on the cone of the speaker, just because I just don't even want to bother explaining it every time, because literally for a while we left it set up, and every engineer, every student and class, Blackbird, any kind of tour we gave at the studio, all my producer friends would walk past the bass cabinet and go, really? And then I go, yes, we listened to it. It's on purpose. It didn't they think it's one of those funny situations where an intern did something stupid, or, we see those ads where the singer's singing into the back of a microphone or whatever. And it's like, no, actually that's a choice. We're miking the wood in front of the speaker on a B15. That's our choice.
That's cool, man. It reminds me of, I think Steve Marcantonio talked about this, when you would record and you get too much S on a microphone. Sometimes they'd put a pencil up in front of the microphone.
It's exactly the same thing. Yeah. It's exactly that. And the pencil works. You know what else works that we found out is the reason why some of those microphones that are more of a U47 style microphones sound as good as they do and as smooth as they do is because the little steel bar on the head basket dissects the capsule in a similar way. Just the lower third of the capsule, it cuts across it. And not knowing the science and the understanding of that, I got into early conversations with Mike Ketchell when he was developing the CV4. And we went down that road and listened. And we're like, what if we made a head basket that exposed that capsule 100%? Like I thought, well, you know, something's in the way of the capsule. Maybe, you know, maybe it would sound better, and it didn't. It was like too bright, and it was essy, and there was like something that just didn't sound as good without that head basket ring dissecting the capsule. So
yeah,
there you go.
That's a trip. Well, I mean, you know, I'm reminded of how in the studio, we're always sticking mics right on everything. But in the real world, we're never sticking our ear right up next to things.
Exactly. Yeah. You're never listening to a kick drum from the inside. You know, like
not even a basketball.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, it might be hard to describe in a few words what gives records a legendary sound, but it would be pretty easy to describe in a few letters: API. For more than 50 years, API Audio has created large format consoles for world-class studios. Famous for co-founder Saul Walker's circuit designs and original 2520 op amp, the sound of API consoles is the sound of great music. API now brings that legendary sound to your home studio with The Box, a small format console featuring the famous API circuitry that is the perfect analog addition to your digital studio. The Box gives you 8 recording channels on the left with built-in mic pre's, high-pass filters, direct inputs, customizable 500 module slots, and 16 summing channels on the right. Or you can mix using all 24 channels, including aux, sends, inserts, and silky smooth faders. API now offers a virtual console experience with a personalized online demo of the Box, 16082, or 2448 console. Sign up for your demo now at apiaudio.com. Atom Audio introduces the new A7V monitor for home and pro studios, the next generation of the incredibly popular A7X. The all-new A-series line of monitors delivers the same highly accurate, transparent sound and unique accelerated ribbon tweeter design that has made Atom Audio famous for over a decade, but now includes new innovations, such as the rotatable high-frequency propagation system waveguide, allowing the XART tweeter to disperse sound with controlled consistency, and DSP-based room correction and speaker voicings. Using the A-Control software or SonarWorks and Measurement Mic, you can now integrate advanced filters directly to the DSP onboard the speaker to help compensate for imperfect room acoustics without introducing annoying latency or requiring plugins. This allows you to tune your monitors for your room, your mix position, and your ears anytime you want to meet your ever-evolving studio needs. Get the extended 5-year warranty for monitors that will improve as your studio improves at atomaudio.com. Let's talk about acoustic. You're a great acoustic player and you've recorded a lot of acoustic guitars. We probably talked about it before, but any other stuff you want to say about some of the go-to ways for recording acoustic, or anything new that you've discovered, or something that was just a fun sound?
You know, I'm going to retort that and say I'm not a great acoustic player in a town of great acoustic players, but I'm an acoustic owner and I've recorded a lot of great acoustic players. You know, my strong suit is definitely as an electric player in town. But I can certainly go down the rabbit hole of acoustic guitars and recording them, because I've been lucky enough to make my living as also an engineer in Nashville. And, you know, I've got a nice assortment of acoustic guitars, like an old Gill that feels almost like campfirey, campy, cool singer-songwriter. I've got a nice Hummingbird. You know, I've got a 25-year-old Taylor. You don't think of Taylors as vintage guitars, but this thing's aged really nicely, and it's a big jumbo, and you know, it translates on tape nice. But at the end of the day, I've also recorded some of these bluegrass guys and you know, who bring in their, you know, $200,000, you know, 1930s or 1920s Gibsons and stuff. And I'm just kind of ready with 2 ideas, you know, and one of them is like a pencil condenser, fairly full range, bright tube pencil condenser, you know, like obviously like KM84, works well. I've got like an AKG C61 that I kind of favor on acoustics. I got a pair of Gefell tube small diaphragm condensers. They're all kind of in the same family, and I'll usually reach for like at least one of those. And then I've been hanging a big old PB90 up, which is like an RCA 44, and it's an old vintage ribbon mic that is really worn. It's got all the bottom end and all the punch. They're very dynamically different, and it's kind of similar in my approach, to those two microphones on that guitar cabinet, on that Dynamount, the BK5 and the Fathead.
Yeah.
They provide different things, and just, I'll listen to the guitar and it's like, oh, that's muddy, and I'll pull the PB90 down and I'll push the pencil condenser up. But if it's a little parlor guitar and it needs a lot of body and character to it or something, I can modify it pretty quickly. Also, lots of utility players, in town. So somebody could pick up a mandolin and a banjo and a thing and a bouzouki and a lot of different instruments come into that acoustic chair. And sometimes it's like, if I put up a good choice for everything, like an 87, which is a staple, it's just usually like not the best choice for a lot of those things, and so I'd rather have that relationship. Again, I bust them to one channel. I don't record both of those.
How do you
I know a lot of
position
engineers
those mics? How do you position them? Right next to each other?
I really try to keep them as close as possible and sort of as phase accurately as possible and straight together. I've had lots of requests to record in stereo, and so I've done a little bit of everything from 12 fret and bridge pointed inward to an XY right in the center. It just depends sometimes. Like if I'm an engineer versus a producer, and it gets confusing. I wear a lot of hats. So, but my personal preferences honestly are to record acoustic guitars in mono using a blend of two microphones, very, very closely positioned, as close as possible in the same range of the instrument. And then we will sweep that instrument around, or I'll ask the guitar player, move over an inch, move closer, move back. We'll really like work on the positioning, and at the same time that I work on the balance. And once we've established that, and I feel it's good, like I said, that's bust to one track. That's the acoustic sound. It's one track mono into Pro Tools, and that's our acoustic sound on the record.
Now, one of the things that I talk about a little bit on the show that I feel like I've noticed when I'm recording myself playing acoustic or singing is I'm struck by that difference of how loud something needs to be in the mix when I'm playing the instrument versus what seems appropriate out in the control room, balancing it in the mix. Do you find that that's a thing? I mean, sometimes I think that the sound of our own voice in our head against the sound of what we're hearing in the earphones, and the sound of the acoustic in the room against what we're coming in the earphones, there's some phasing cancellation kind of stuff that could happen that I think maybe requires us to want to have it turned up really loud. Do you notice that with people, or do you guys just have sort of self mixers out there and people just adjust their own mix and you don't have to think about it?
I do a decent drum heavy 2 mix for the band, and then everybody's on their own fader so they can have as much or less as possible. And, we're fortunate to work with professionals that have figured out sort of what's best for them. And I never notice any real issues with phasing or like bleed from their own instruments out of the headphones back into the microphones. Obviously, we all deal with click bleed. Some of these guys are kind of deaf and they're just running the click really hot. So we have tricks in the studio where we roll the click off at like 3 or 2K, or even 1K, and just, those guys can punish themselves with as much as possible. It's usually the top end of the click that kind of makes it through. And I've still had to isotope some things at the end of the day. I'm more worried about click, honestly, than I am like phasing from someone self. It's amazing. Like some artists listen so loud that their headphones feed back when they take their headphones off.
I worked with an artist. We had to have like double headbands on his headbands on his going over his headphones every time he did vocals.
It's astounding to me. Like and like some of these drummers too, man, they got those ISO cans. And they'll take them off and leave them on the stand. And, one of the intern gigs around here is like, if we're doing overdubs in the room with live microphones, you got to run out and like unplug everybody's headphones.
Yep.
And to walk out there, like on a drummer, our dear friend Chad Cromwell, who's wonderful, I'm always astounded with how loud his headphones are. They're just like blaring across the room every time. But, you know, he's got to rock out, man. He's got to feel it. He hits hard and he plays hard and he means it, you know, and I think that to capture the energy, I think sometimes it needs to be a little bit loud, you know, like when I'm by myself in the control room tracking guitar on an overdub, you know, it's probably punishing for any other human being. And I would never actually listen that loud, but I will perform that loud. It's a different vibe, you know? And so even when I listen to playback, I turn it down to half. Like, and yeah, I wouldn't be able to stand listening back to it as loud as I'm going down with it. But I just need to feel the energy.
Yeah, I feel that way too. It's hard. And sometimes I try and teach myself to arrive at the comfort zone loud, and then as soon as I can turn it way down, because like now I already know what I'm going to play or something, and it's just a question of, but you know, it's tricky. It's because I can't last very long and loud anymore.
Yeah, and you know, but there's also this other thing, that this balance of like intimidation and pocket versus performance. Like if you're too loud over top of everything else, you're not going to be laying in and pocketing and more as consistent and sort of aggressive, if that's what the part needs, you know? And so you really need to turn yourself back a little bit and let the rhythm section and the music be loud and play some things. And then other times the part needs real nuancing. You need a light, dynamic musical touch on your instrument. You need to be able to like hear the strings scrape across the wood when you're using vibrato on soft notes on your guitar. And I mean, I'll have my guitar in those instances, I'll go from normal listening to having my guitar literally on stun in my headphones so that I can really express myself that way. So I feel like it's just, you know, it varies. It's a dynamic process, and it just depends on what it needs. I can always tell when a singer is just got way too much of themselves. They're just intimidated by themselves, and they're like in this weird, they're afraid to flip up, and they're in half voice or whatever. And it's just like, hey, give yourself half, you know, like just way less, and then bam, they just start singing better instantly, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so speaking of rocking out, the Dirt soundtrack, Motley Crue, is that one of the recent things that you've been working on, or is that something you did previously?
That was a couple of years ago now. That was kind of like a flyby Bob Rock hang. You know, we ended up just cutting vocals on that project and over here, so I didn't get too deep into it. But I got all the stories, and I get to hang out with Bob Rock for a couple of days. So
that's cool.
So that was super fun. You know, he's a great guy, and I didn't nerd out on him at all until like the last day. I got about 30 minutes with him, and I went, okay, we got all the work done. Great. I went right back to the beginning of the payolas. You Got the Eyes of a Stranger. I'm like, the guitar delay, and talk to me about this and that. And he loved that I knew all that. He didn't suspect it. You know, that's the secret, is like, you know, don't fanboy too early in the thing. I think he was really surprised because I might have had like a cold bedside manner throughout the process to get things done. And he probably thought, this guy doesn't know who I am. And I'm like, I know who you are. Yeah, no, I had a list of questions and I got through them. I still, you know, I mean, we dialed some mixes in together in the mix room, which was fun on that. They weren't, I don't think they were Bob's finals, but we printed some stuff, and we got into like mix bus compression and the theory and the things of that. And he's the first one that really aggressively used a 33609 on a rock vocal.
Oh, really?
That I would have never contemplated. That is magic. It's like, wow, yeah, I understand that. I never would have chosen that for its apparent, because what I know it does to a drum kit, you know, as far as pronouncing the transients and the punctuation, I would have assumed that I don't know. I assumed wrong. That's just a great lesson in just try everything and listen to what it actually is and does and how it sits in a mix. So yeah, Bob was big on the 33609 on vocals, which was fun.
Yeah, it's one of the fun things about working with other people in studios is they bring in ways they've been doing things, and you get to see it right then and there and hear it. I love it.
Yeah.
Do you want to record killer drums in your home studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from a Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Do you want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro-sounding mix that won't take years to learn, the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of creating a great sounding mix, then register for my free course Mixmaster Bundle to get great mixes using simple free plugins. And get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR at checkout to get 10% off any course for a limited time. Is it fair to ask you for, an introduction to who Bob Rock is for the Rockstars?
Oh, sure. I mean, just Google him. I mean, he's probably one of the most diverse, rock and, not just rock. Of course he produced Metallica and Motley Crue, but he also produces Michael Bublé, and just so many things. But he was in a band called Rock and Hide, and before that he was in a band called the Payolas, and they had big hits. Eyes of a Stranger was one that I had mentioned. Bob Rock is one of the greats. Right on. Definitely, certainly a bucket list for me.
Why do I remember a pair of very big drumsticks that were like the Bob Rock drumsticks? Was that a thing, or am I just?
That was probably a thing. The other thing that I thought was interesting is you got to really pay attention to singer rituals and things that they need and do to make them happy, and so everybody performs differently. And with Vince Neil from Motley Crue, he liked singing on a set of speakers. So we set near fields up in the vocal booth, and he also holds a drumstick. He will not sing a vocal without a drumstick in his hand.
Right,
and it's just some kind of I don't know what it is, but it makes a big difference. Like the sound check kind of going down just on a set of headphones, no drumstick, was not impactful. And then throw up a set of speakers, put a drumstick in his hand, and there's that sound.
That's
suddenly
amazing.
He just kind of comes into character and delivers it. So it's an interesting thing.
How would you do that? How would you set up a pair of speakers and do a vocal that way? What tips do you have for us? How are we going to screw that up, and what's a good way to get that right?
Yeah, it's like no matter what, you're gonna screw it up. There's no good way other than put them out of phase. They're out of phase with each other so that there is some weird cancellation point in the middle. And then you just make sure that microphone is positioned for the maximum amount of null. So before the artist goes in there, you play it back at some kind of reasonable listening volume. And especially in rock and roll, you shout over top of it and make sure that the music is impactful enough over you being loud. It's out of phase. So you then, with an engineer, keep moving that mic around, keep spinning it, keep trying different axes, a little bit up and down, maybe a little lower on the singer, but pointed up towards them and the ceiling. Find that spot without them in the room where the music is the most canceled.
At the mic. So in other words, the two speakers are canceling when they hit the mic.
Yeah, at the mic. And then record a full pass of that bleed. For an isotope process, for there's a couple of tools called RipX. There's a few algorithms and a few softwares. There's there was a track software. There's a few things that you'll want to get into to just help your odds with some of that bleed. Isotope is the most powerful tool. So you load that print of the bleed into isotope as the source in their debleed situation. And then you start applying that to the vocal until you can start to hear artifacts. And you'd be surprised. You get a pretty darn isolated vocal using all of those tips and tools and tricks. But, you just got to be kind of prepared for that.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's an awesome tip, and I appreciate that. That's really fun. And I guess it probably also helps if you're doing that in a room that's not super live, because otherwise the speakers are bouncing off all the walls.
Yeah, that's right. And so our vocal booths are really well treated with fabric behind the singer and stuff. And you don't obviously don't point the speakers at a diffuser panel if you've got one,
right?
Point it at fabric. You just got to, just use common sense when you're working in that environment for sure.
That's awesome. Well, dude, we are arriving at the end of our podcast interview. Thank you so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars again with us. A blast to hang out with you. We covered a lot of cool topics, man. I love that we got to dig into guitars and everything else. Let me ask you our closing question, which I asked you before, but I like to re-ask it anyway, because maybe it's a new answer. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine and you go find Dave. Maybe you don't have to go back to the youngest Dave. Maybe you're just going back, 5 years or something like that. Who knows? And you say, listen, I've come back to give you this bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself. What advice would you go back and give yourself?
It's going to sound lame to all the listeners, but health, nutrition, and lifestyle.
That's a good tip, man. That's a real good tip.
You don't think about that shit when you're young, man. And then you sit in a room in a cave for 20 years and, you eat a bunch of shit and you put on some weight and your circulation gets bad. And, I've got so many friends and colleagues now that are, artists take care of themselves. They're at the gym all the time. They're out on the road. They're walking around venues and things. But like, if you're really going to do this, if you're going to be like, I'm a studio guy, totally, I'm assuming you're, Studio Rockstar podcast listeners are like kind of invested in the idea of doing this, and they're building rooms with gear in it. And they're going to spend a lot of time in there and in that chair. You really, I'm just getting hip to the meal delivery prep services. That's all holistic, chef prepped stuff. I got a couple of little workout partners around the neighborhood. We try to get each other out just for even walks around the neighborhood. It's not old guy stuff. It's young person stuff. This is the stuff that all of your peers and artists are already doing. All of the 20-year-old artists that are out there are at the gym, and they're walking around venues and towns, and they're traveling and, walking, through the airport and loading luggage and loading equipment. And the 20-year-old engineers have started their journey sitting in a chair at a desk. This thing, you'll feel it at 30, you'll way feel it at 40, and beyond that, people start losing people early, and I've been around long enough now to see the difference and the impact that has just on your energy and your ability to collaborate and communicate.
Yeah, I think that's really, really wise and sage advice. And thank you for that, Dave. And I'm bringing on some guests onto the podcast to talk specifically about that stuff too. People who are studio guys who are also very into their health regimens and training and stuff like that. So,
well, and I mean, this is another deep rabbit hole. I know we're closing up, but like with health is mental health as well too. There's a lot of rejection in the music business. Like, make sure that you're outfitted for this and that everything feels like a victory and a reward from the work itself. If it's like this comparative nature where you're feeling disappointed and judged and unfulfilled, you might not have a happy life doing this, and that's okay. You just got to find things that compel you to feel fulfilled and happy. Happiness, health, nutrition. That's the whole secret to everything.
Yeah, and I'll say that when you go listen to that mix and you're like, God, that mix sucks, don't despair too much, because you probably have a mix in your playlist that you did previously that doesn't suck, and you just got to print a few more and move on to more projects, and it'll all. Well,
but here's the other thing too. It's interesting. We didn't get into this other question, but I actually had something that I wanted to kind of talk about, and it's a little bit about this for a second, which is
just go for it. Talk about it now.
You were just talking about, like, if that mix sucks, don't despair too much. The interesting thing about that is that if you think your mix sucks, then you're in the right place. You've graduated. There's something that happens early in your career that's very dangerous, and it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you don't know what the Dunning-Kruger effect is, the liner note on that is that you don't have the skills and you're not good enough to know what's good or bad. And that gets dangerous because people over-poise themselves, over-network themselves, and their work isn't good enough to speak for itself. And so there's this interesting thing that happens in your career where I think that the earliest work we do, we're the most sort of almost arrogant about it, to a certain extent. And then when you really start competing and comparing and getting some feedback and maybe even losing work and losing opportunities and being excluded and not considered, you can either go into this dark hole of thinking that life is unfair, or you can realize that your work isn't good enough. And for me, everything that I've lost at this point, yes, there's politics. Yes, there's this and that and the other thing. But honestly, if my work was so undeniably compelling, I would have gotten that job. My work was not good enough, and it's fine. And I'm fine with that because I've done lots of good work that was good enough. And so there's a really, really important thing about sort of mental health and, surviving this music industry, which is just predicated on other people's judgment of your work and then, passive exclusion. You don't even know why you're not being invited to the party here, and this is important, that you're not so critical that you just want to stop because, if you stop, you lose. The only people who win are people who never stopped. And if the work itself really is truly, truly compelling you to get up every day and do it, then great. If you're critical about it and your mix sucks, then make it better. Fix it. Watch a million YouTube videos. Get into the mix with the masters thing. Go fly to Fabrique, whatever castle in France, and hang out with Greg Wells. Get into it. You do the work. Like A/B your work with the rest of the world. The fact that you're hearing that it's not as good means that you've got it. You passed beyond the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger actually becomes, once you graduate, sadly, there's no middle period where everything is happy. That actually becomes imposter syndrome. And anyone who is really, really great, truthfully, in the end, when they're left alone with their thoughts, their work isn't as good as it can be, and we're all just kind of suffering from this thing where it's not depressing enough to not get up and try again the next day. And that's kind of the sweet spot where a lot of artists live. It sounds a little weird or depressing, but truly that's it. And then you celebrate. Like sometimes you do get a great mix and you get a high five from the client and the record comes out and it feels good and it sounds good and you're okay. You're happy with it. It's cool. Like you put that on an A/B sheet and start comparing it with the outside world, you realize you've got some more work to do. It's all good, but you got to hit records. So get up tomorrow and just keep up that process.
That's great, man. Good advice, dude. Thank you. I appreciate that. Rock stars, take that to heart because, I think I agree. And I think that idea of the fact that we are self-critical is the artist's drive to continue making art. If we lost that drive, we wouldn't come back the next day to try and make something better anyway, So David, tell the rock stars, where can they come find you online? Where should they learn more about you? Check out your stuff. What if they're ready to make their next hit record with you? How would you like them to find you?
It's just at Kalmusky. That's it. Kalmusky. I'm going to start doing some little video tutorial things on TikTok. I'm at Kalmusky on TikTok. There's no posts yet. But just, go follow that. That'll turn into stuff. Instagram is at Kalmusky. Facebook is, /Kalmusky. Kalmusky.com is the website. And that's it. Just punch my last name into pretty much anything and you'll find me.
Right on. With a K.
With a K. Kalmusky.
Awesome, dude. Well, thanks for hanging, dude. Great to see you. And I look forward to seeing you in person around the studio soon.
Sounds good. All
right, man. Talk soon, dude. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible: API, OWC, Spectra 1964, Samply, Atom Audio, and Isotope. Remember to use these coupon codes for special discounts. At isotope.com/rockstars, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your extended 30-day free trial subscription for access to many plugins. At samply.app, sign up for a free account with unlimited projects, and use the coupon code RSR20 to get 20% off the first 3 months when you're ready to upgrade to a pro account. At recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy, use the coupon ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course for a limited time. You will find links to all these awesome sponsors in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.